Sing along if you know the words.
Do you know about the government? Can you tell me about the Constitution? Hey, learn about the USA. In 1787, I'm told our founding fathers did agree to write a list of principles for keeping people free. The USA was just starting out a whole brand new country, and so our people spelled it out, the things that we should be. And they put those principles down on paper and called it the Constitution, and it's been helping us run our country ever since then. The first part of the Constitution is called the Preamble. It tells what those founding fathers set out to do. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. In 1787, I'm told our founding fathers all sat down and wrote a list of principles that's known the world around. The USA was just starting out a whole brand new country, and so our people spelled it out. They wanted a land of liberty, and the preamble goes like this. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America, for the United States of America.
Welcome everyone. I sincerely hope that there was some sing-along happening on your own sides, right? Anybody? Okay, good. Thank you. That song is catchy and is a good theme for what we're talking about today. So I'm so excited that people are here. I was really worried last week when only 5 people came to our lesson, and then I realized it was Labor Day weekend, and so I decided not to take it personally. But I'm happy that you guys are here, and hopefully we will make it worthwhile. A-Train, I'm sorry you got yelled at, but it was worth it. So it was worth it. If you were singing the preamble, it was worth it. Well, we are going to get started. So what do you think we are going to be talking about today, ladies and gentlemen? We just sang a song about it. Yeah, the Constitution, the Constitution. As always, you are welcome to keep it going in the chat, chatting it up, but you can turn on your cameras so you can see us, or your microphones are great, but I'm happy that you are here. So we are going to be talking about the Constitution. As a little recap, getting to the Constitution was tricky. We talked about the Constitutional Convention last week and some of the stuff that went into that. Once they get the document written, there are some problems getting it ratified. They have to get all 13 states to agree to this. And the Constitution is a whole new thing. And we've been doing DBAs this week, which, side note, if you haven't done DBA number 1 with me yet, send me a text or an email with a day and a time that will work for you, and we will get it done. I don't use the scheduler app because I'm always available. So just let me know a time that'll work for you, and chances are it will work for me too. And we'll get your DBA done. But I had some interesting conversations with people about the Constitution in DBAs this week. And a couple of you brought up the point that the Constitution was written intentionally. And there aren't a lot of pre-19th century governments we can look at that were planned. Like intentionally, a group of people sat together and thought out, okay, this is how our government will function. And the US Constitution is one of the first we can turn to with that. But that means that there are a lot of ideas that got debated and discussed and written down and then had to get presented to the country and convince them to go along with that. And it wasn't smooth sailing. And we get two strong groups of people, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, who both love the Constitution, ironically. They're both fine with it. Their real concern is that it doesn't do enough, or it maybe could potentially do too much to protect individual rights. And that's where we get a little musical number. So 30 seconds of Hamilton, and then I need to ask you what this has to do with things.
Alexander joins forces with James Madison and John Jay to write a series of essays defending the new United States Constitution entitled the Federalist Papers. The plan was to write a total of 25 essays, the work divided evenly among the three men. In the end, they wrote 85 essays in the span of 6 months. John Jay got sick after writing 5. James Madison wrote 29. Hamilton wrote the other 51.
Okay, so what do we get as part of this debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists? What pieces of literature are we gifted with? Yay! Yeah, we get the Federalist Papers, a collection of essays. They're published in newspapers, and they explain how a federal system would work. So I've got this background today. Check it out. Okay, that's what federalism is. Okay, I hope you could see it. So it's this idea of having a national government that's over everything, but then you also have state governments that are over their individual states, and lower than that, you have local governments that are over their local municipalities. So it's having a national government over everything and having state governments at the same time. That's what federalism is. And coming from a confederation where the states were all kind of equal and there was no national government, this was different. The Constitution is also where we see the idea of having 3 separate branches. Before the Constitution, under the Articles of Confederation, there was just Congress, and they couldn't do anything. So going from Congress that can't do anything to 3 branches that are over, my pointing's wrong, everything, was a big change. And so the Federalist Papers go through and they explain a bunch of different concepts, trying to get people to understand that, hey, the Constitution could work. We're defending it, we're explaining it, we think this is gonna work. If we've got 3 branches, we can have checks and balances and abuse of power. If we have a federal system, then the nation can be united. We can fix our money problems, we can fix our problems with France, well, not so much France, but with Spain, who won't let us down the Missouri River anymore, with England, who won't let us trade and is being kind of annoying. We can stop having domestic fights like Shays' Rebellion. We can make this work, and the Federalist Papers kind of explain all of this, and they do a pretty good job of it. And they end up coming with a compromise. The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists compromise, and they are able to ratify the Constitution. So in order to ratify it, they said they needed to get 9 out of 13 states. So they get 9 out of 13, yay, the Constitution's in force, but then the holdout states also go ahead and ratify it. And the compromise was that they would add 10 amendments to protect individual rights, and that's where we get the Bill of Rights. So once the Constitution is ratified, it's in force. So think to yourself, what has to happen next? If the Constitution's ratified, it's now our government. We're gonna have 3 branches with Congress and a president and courts. What's the next step? Gonna have a president. We're gonna have members of Congress, members of the Senate. What do we need to do? Perhaps we could do it in November on a Tuesday. Are these good hints? Am I helping? Perhaps the people could express their opinions and choose representatives.
Presidential elections.
Thank you, Ford. I was running out of hints. They have to have an election. Like, the Constitution's just a document that talks about how things are going to work. So they've got to put it in play, which means having an election, a presidential election, and they also have to elect everybody else. 2 senators from every state. I mean, there's only 13 at the time, but they all need elected, and congressmen. And then once they're elected, they're going to have to choose and appoint and confirm judges and get all this stuff into play. Who should run for president? Who is the most respected person in 1780s America?
George Washington.
George Washington. Remember how George Washington's a big deal and how Madison and Franklin convinced him to come to the convention so that it would get a sense of legitimacy because everyone respected him because he was the commander-in-chief of everyone in the only war they'd fought and therefore 100% victory rate. George Washington was really, really respected. So when the Constitution gets put in place and they have the first round of elections, he is voted president. He doesn't...
Unanimously.
Yes. No opposition. He doesn't really even run. He just gets elected. So be like George Washington. He's a big deal. So he gets elected, and the head of the government is in New York City right now because Washington, D.C. doesn't exist, and there's going to be a whole lot of whatever to get it sorted out. But so Washington gets elected. He takes the oath of office and gets inaugurated in March of 1789 in New York City at a building called the Federal Building, which looks like these pictures. And it's the first time for everything. So a lot of you guys mentioned in that discussion post about how the Constitution, like why it's lasted, partly being because it's vague or because it can be amended. Well, part of that is it has to be put into place. It is kind of vague. So with Washington as the first president, kind of everything that he does sets the precedent and like gets things going. He appoints cabinet advisors to help him out. He does and doesn't do certain things, and that sets the example. For example, he runs for re-election and then doesn't run for re-election when he could have the third time, and kind of sets this pattern that presidents serve 2 terms. And that's just a tradition until we get into the 20th century when it becomes an amendment. So everything that Washington does really gets the ball rolling. Okay, welcome, Dustin. That is it for me talking about Washington, because now you guys need to do a little vocabulary hookup. So I've got a list of terms here. These are all words that come up and we need to kind of have a good grasp on when we talk about the Constitution. And here are many, many, many definitions. So what I would like you to do is take that annotate pen. So if you need to go to view options and get annotate from the black drop-down toolbar, and draw me a lot of colorful lines connecting the correct term to the correct definition. It's going to be a very messy, matchy board, but let's see if we can get all these terms lined up. Okay. Don't be afraid to disagree if you don't think someone's got it right. Just jump in there and do the ones you know. It's looking good. 100% so far. Mm-hmm. I love those little, like the stamp arrows, like what Dustin used. I think those are fun. Whenever I can use them, I always want to. The lines look great. That wasn't a suggestion to change, just I personally enjoy that little stamp guy. Okay, there's only one that I don't see has been connected to anything yet.
I think there's 7, what's it called? Words, and then there's 6 definitions.
Oh no, that would be why I'm not seeing a matchup. Thanks, Gabriella. Okay, well, let's go through them then. So judicial review is the idea that the court can decide if something is in line with the Constitution or not. And we are going to talk about the origins of that in another lesson, but that is judicial review. And then concurrent, we've got the idea that powers are shared between the state and the national government. So that's back to this idea. So concurrent are things that both the national and the state can do, like making laws or collecting taxes. Both your state government will do that and your national government will do that. Okay, checks and balances, the way the 3 branches keep an eye on each other. Constitutional, agrees with the Constitution. Bicameral, having 2 houses like we have in our legislature. And then popular election, is, yep, the majority winning. So we do not have a definition for pluralism up here. Does anybody feel like they could try and give a definition for pluralism? Especially if you've worked on Federalist 10, you might have one.
Pluralism is the idea that a diverse set of people can limit, if I remember correctly, can limit corruption in decisions or something like that.
Yeah, that's definitely on the right train, A-Train, the idea that pluralism, having a variety of ideas, and Madison talks about having a variety of ideas will prevent abuses from power, prevent one group from getting too much. Any other definitions or ideas for what pluralism means? Okay, A-Train, I think you have everyone's support. Oh, there we go. The idea that a large number of different sectional, political, and social interests existing in a nation helps cancel out the chances of one faction or party favoring an extreme agenda controlling the national government. That is a textbook definition, and I love it. And it's great because we have a very diverse place. We have a lot of differences regionally, economically, socially, religiously. People have a lot of different ideas. Pluralism is the idea that that's okay. Having a lot of different ideas means that the majority is not going to be able to have total control because people are going to consider different things. There was a lot of concern in the 1780s that having a strong national government, this one, would be so united by one ideology that everybody else would be squashed. And so talking about having pluralism, having a lot of different ideas meant that that one group wouldn't be able to do whatever they would want, that there would always be kind of a variety of ideas and that power would shift and change as ideas changed and that people would be reflected in that. So great definition. I'm going to clear all your beautiful drawings off because we are done with them. Thank you for playing a little vocab with me. And we watched the preamble song already, so I'm not going to have us watch it again, but I am asking you to think about the preamble. The Constitution starts out with this statement. It's not long, we can sing about it, and it's got these 6 points in it. This was intentional. The Constitution was written to address a lot of problems. So what are some of the literal problems that they're dealing with that these points fix? So in the yellow box, please write or type or copy paste in, but what are some of the things that were going on that led to the Constitution that these points are fixing? Lots of right answers, so don't be scared. What need would they have for protecting the common defense? What did they experience that would lead them to think this was an important thing to be providing for? Okay, got some brave suggestions here, which I'm super impressed with. I love it. So with like Shays Rebellion, that's a great example. Like, that's not domestic tranquility. If you've got armed robbers going around locking up the courts and arresting people, that's not peace. And that's also a problem with like the justice system, because there wasn't a federal court to come in and protect them or help them. So those were some real issues they were dealing with the states taxing each other. That's a problem with a more perfect union. States that belong to the same nation shouldn't be taxing each other or changing. I guess that would also fall with like different currencies. There's British soldiers still stationed in lots of places outside the colonies. So there's concern for common defense again. The general welfare, the economy's trash. And so people are needing more help and more support. So there's lots of specifics that we could keep listing on, but all of the problems that are addressed in the preamble are very specific. Like, they're coming from a place where they actually dealt with this and they're trying to answer it. So the Constitution itself is just a document. It's not even long. It's barely 4 pages if we put it in 12 font. And it's just divided out as 7 articles, 7 different pieces. And then it has all of the amendments, but it's put together to address a lot of different issues. So Article 1 is all about the legislative branch. This is where we get the rules about it being bicameral, about what the requirements are to serve in the House of Representatives, about what the requirements are to serve in the Senate. And this is also where we get a list of some of the things they can do. The enumerated powers, or sometimes they're called the delegated powers or the express powers, are the things that the national government can do, because it's a balance between national and state. And the reserved powers are the things that the states can do. So on the left, I've got some of the ideals that we've talked about and learned about earlier. So in this idea of having bicameralism, of having reserved powers and delegated powers, we should also see this idea of representation, right? Congress is made of representatives who are working on behalf of the people. They're going to vote on issues, so democracy's there. There's separation of powers, because Congress is supposed to be making the laws. There's checks and balances, because they can't make them themselves. They have to be signed by the executive. They have the opportunity to override that veto if they need to. And then dividing power. There's responsibilities given to the national government and to the state. So all of these principles continue to play a role in what we're looking at. So Article 1 basically is the legislative branch. It's having a Senate and it's having the House of Representatives, and their responsibility is to make the laws. Article 2 is the executive branch. It's having a president. It's the requirements to serve in that office. And it's the same ideas. We've got the idea of representation, that they're elected by an electoral college. There's democracy in that voting as well, and as well as a popular election. The executive branch has specific things they can do, so it's separation of powers, the specific things they can't do, so there's checks and balances. Article 2 is all about the executive branch and the presidency. Article 3 is about the judicial branch. And the court system's fun and tricky, and we'll look at more details when we do the judicial branch. But it's got these same ideas in here as well. We've got checks and balances, we've got separation of powers. So Article 3 is all about the courts. And then Article 4 is about the relationship between the states. It says that every state has to have a republican form of government, so they have to have some kind of representation. And the states have to respect each other. They have to have full faith and credit in each other. So if something is a law in one state, if you are licensed to drive a car in Tennessee and you go to Kentucky, you can still drive your car. They have to respect the decisions made between the states. This is the idea of federalism again, that the states are equal parts, but that they're under the national government. And then Article 5 is about the amendment process. So how could you amend the Articles of Confederation? Do you guys remember what the rule was to amend that? Was it ever amended? Nope, it was not. It had to be unanimous. Yeah, they just replaced it because they couldn't fix it, which is how we have the Constitution. It had to be unanimous. And so for the Constitution, they knew that there had to be a way to change it, because otherwise they'd run into this again. There'd just be another convention and write another document, and that would be it. And as we know from the Compromise, the first thing that comes out of the Constitution is the first 10 amendments, is the Bill of Rights. So the way to amend the Constitution, it's a two-step process, and each step has 2 steps. And so it doesn't require unanimous support, but it requires a lot of support. It requires 2/3 of the national government. So an amendment can be proposed in Congress, and it has to pass the Senate and the House by a 2/3 vote. Or there can be a national convention, like they had to write the Constitution, and 2/3 of the delegates there can vote for it. But we've never had a national convention. It always goes through Congress. But then once it's approved by the national government, it goes to the states. And all of the states have to approve it. Well, 3/4 of the states. So it's more than just a majority, but it's not unanimous. So it's doable. And the states can pass it either by having a state convention, or it can get voted on in the state legislature. So it has to be dealt with by the national government at 2/3, by the states at 3/4. And that's how you amend the Constitution, which is how we've been able to do it a lot. Right? Yeah, they were in on it. They were in on it. Side note, the state that put in the final vote to end prohibition was Utah, which is super funny because they have like really, really strict alcohol sales, but also they grow a lot of barley. So financially it was smart for them. Side note. Article 6 is the shortest and the most simple, and it's just the supremacy clause. It says that the national government is the boss. States, you can do whatever you want with your state powers, but you can't disagree with the national government. If the national government says Amendment 21's in force and you can sell alcohol, all the states can do it. The supremacy clause just says the national government is the final say. And then Article 7, so federalism. Federalism is the boss, dividing up the power. Article 7 was how to ratify it. So since the Constitution has been ratified, we don't really need Article 7 anymore, but that's what it was about. Okay. And then we get the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and that was the compromise. The Anti-Federalists were worried that the Constitution wasn't going to do enough to protect individual rights. Federalists were worried that if you have a list of individual rights, individuals will only be able to do those things listed. So they compromised with these 10 separate amendments. Here is a list of them. And they wanted to make sure it protected a number of different things. So we're doing a lot of annotating today, so be brave. But go ahead and put the number in the boxes for if you think that that amendment is dealing with individual freedoms, protection against government power, or the rights of the accused. So the First Amendment deals with freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. Those would all be individual freedoms. So I will bravely draw a number 1 in individual freedoms box. Good job. Okay. There are 8 more amendments to be sorted. Good.
You wouldn't think the Fifth Amendment? Okay.
We can argue about the Fifth Amendment. I think it kind of would go everywhere. Mhm. Okay, I think that's all of them. So this is one way that you can look at it. And as Ford was saying, some of them you could argue go in different places. For example, the Fifth Amendment is right to due process, freedom from self-incrimination. So that's protection from government abuses. It also has a caveat about property compensation, that if the government takes your land as part of like eminent domain, they have to pay you for it. So that would be freedom from government protection. But also it's rights of the accused, because you're not being asked to incriminate yourself unless you've been accused of something or witnessing to something. So some of them go in different places. So this is just one way of looking at how they can fit. Another way is I like to organize them like this and just put 1 through 4 under the idea of personal freedoms. First Amendment really deals with freedom of expression in what you can say, what you can believe, where you can go. But it's important to remember that these are also protections against government abuses. Freedom of speech doesn't mean you can say whatever you want without any consequences. It means the government can't censor your speech. I can still ask you to stop. I can still be really offended by it because I'm just a person. And you can still have to deal with those consequences of like slander or libel. Like you can't just say whatever you want. First Amendment just means the government won't stop you. And it's the same thing with, and there's details to that we'll get into about when the government does when we talk about Supreme Court cases. Second Amendment, it's rights, personal rights again. Third, no quartering of soldiers, which was really common under the British occupation. Like all of those British soldiers that were stationed and holding Boston, they had to live with the citizens. Like you would have British soldiers living in your house. That was the rule. So that was not going to be the rule in America, so much so that we don't really even think about it. And then the Fourth Amendment, freedom from personal seizures, that also can kind of blend into others, but really it's just knowing that you're securing your property. And then I like to group these 4 under rights of the accused. This is just my preference because they all deal with more of the justice system and the rights of accused persons to be having a speedy and public trial, a trial by jury, freedom from excessive bails, the existence of civil courts in case there's issues between citizens that maybe aren't criminal. And then there's amendments 9 and 10, which both are really just the idea that there are other rights. 9, that people have other rights not listed, and 10, that states and have rights that are not listed. So why are these 2 separate amendments? Why are 9 and 10 2 separate things and not combined together? Yeah. There was concern that if you have a list of rights, that those are eventually the only rights you might have. And so that's really where 9 and 10 come in. 9 in saying that there are other rights that belong to individuals that aren't listed here in this Bill of Rights, that citizens can do more than just 1 through 8. And then 10 is really the idea that there are other things that are reserved to the state. It's not just what's listed in Article 1, those delegated powers that we gave to the national government, and then it mentions some of the things states can do. Article 10 reinforces that if we didn't mention it in the Constitution, it belongs to the state. And the same thing, if we didn't give that power to somebody else, it belongs to the individuals. So like the idea that people have a right to privacy, that doesn't really fall anywhere in the Constitution. Or the same thing like with a right to education. That doesn't really fit anywhere. But amendments 9 and 10 say, okay, well, yeah, people should have a right to privacy. That we didn't say they don't. And Amendment 10, well, the Constitution doesn't mention education, so it must be a state's right. It must be something that's left to the states. Good. Then there are other amendments, 27 of them. So 17 amendments since the Bill of Rights. They all go through this same process. They have to be approved 2/3 on the national level in Congress and then go out to the states to be approved by 3/4 of them. And I just think this timeline is interesting. So you can see like the first 10 amendments happen really quick, and then we get 11 and 12, and then there's this huge gap until we start getting other amendments. And just kind of glancing at this, what you can see, do you see any commonality or any themes of what some of these amendments are about?
Progress, kind of changing how things used to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely changing. I like the word progress. Expansion of rights, for sure. Protection, right to vote in a number of different categories is guaranteed. Some changes in giving people more, personal rights, government rights. The change in how senators are elected, that's the 17th Amendment. Senators used to get elected by the state. So they would be elected by the state legislature, and then those would go serve in the US Senate. And so it was changed so that now they're popularly elected by the people. So like more representation that way. Some changes, some progress, some updates. It's hard to amend the Constitution, not impossible, obviously, as we have 27 amendments that prove, but it is difficult. And not every amendment that passes step 1 makes it to step 2. So what happens if something gets approved at the national level, gets that 2/3 vote, but then when it goes out to the states, it doesn't quite make it? There's kind of two things that can happen. They're called zombie amendments, the amendments that have passed at the national level but haven't yet passed at the states. Like not enough states have voted on them to decide if they're going to pass or not. They're still just like out there in limbo. They could maybe come back from the dead, but maybe not. And then there's also the idea of failures, amendments that they had votes and they didn't pass. So I've got 2 lists. I'm going to put them in the chat box, and I'd love for you guys to go to these sites and pull out one example. So this first link is for an article about zombie amendments, and then this is a list of some failed amendments. So click on one or both of those links in the chat and scroll through the article and find one that you think is interesting. One that either didn't pass, was failed by the states, or an amendment that's out there that could still come to life. Okay, and when you come back, I know, because this is what we're doing today, but annotate. Go ahead and type it in on the screen under either the failure or the zombie. So click the link in the chat, read about either a zombie amendment or a failed amendment, pick one that you think is interesting, come paste it here on the screen. One of the zombies that can come back to life is actually the 27th Amendment. So the most recent one was passed in the 90s. And it says that if Congress passes any laws that change their salary, it won't go into effect until the next group is elected, which just like makes sense. But it was one of the group of amendments that were approved on the national level in the 1790s. And it just never got enough votes in the states to be approved. And one of the reasons for that is because the country keeps growing. Like if you need to get 3/4 of 13, you only have to get 9. But if you need to get 3/4 of 50, it's just a bigger number. And so the amendment just kept kind of, it was out there in this limbo land, and then occasionally states would vote on it, but then more states would get added to the union. But in the 90s, 3 more states held elections or included it on their state business, and it got passed. And so that's how we have the 27th Amendment, approved a long time ago, but then step 2 kind of more recently. Some of these are great. Does anybody want to talk about the amendment that you found? Because some of these are really interesting, like the titles of nobility is kind of interesting. And then, so that's the ERA is actually on both, unable to deny or abridge on account of sex, and then failed because it could come back. And that's one of the other things is there's still the chance that a state could have another election and re-vote on it and change. And it could go from being a no to yes and then be passed again. Just do another minute for, I know some of you are still reading, which is good. I hope one of the takeaways you get from this is that the Constitution is flexible. Just because there hasn't been an amendment in your lifetime doesn't mean there haven't been some in mine, and doesn't mean there won't be. It can be changed, and it was written with the idea of being changed. I said at the beginning about how the US Constitution was intentional. It was written in a very, I mean, there were some disputes, but it wasn't the result of a civil war or a dramatic change. It was this idea of, okay, we've tried something under the Articles and it didn't work. Let's get together, let's think it out, let's debate it, let's discuss it, let's make something that will work. And because it's vague in some places and able to be adapted, it can be flexible. And that's really why it's the longest written Constitution still in effect, because it can be changed. But sometimes it takes some time. Anybody else want to comment on these before I move on to my last question? Oh, the Corwin Amendment is interesting. So I hope whoever looked that one up enjoyed it, because that's an interesting one. Okay, my last question is, what is the Constitution? If you're familiar with the concept of an elevator pitch, it's like, how would you summarize your thing if you only have the elevator ride to tell someone about it? So 30 seconds or less. But if you're on a speed elevator, you've got 10, 15 seconds. How would you explain the Constitution? It's a word that gets used and thrown around a lot, but what is the Constitution? Yeah, I love it. Go ahead and throw some answers up there, or throw them in the chat. If anyone wants to get on mic, I'll give you 10 seconds to talk.
Constitution are the rights that are granted to people that basically a majority of people or who they have represent them agree on should be universal.
Cool. Thanks, Ford. I love it. So the idea of having agreement, of having representation, it's where individuals get their rights. Good, succinct one here on the screen, a plan defining the government and what it can be. That's definitely the definition for Constitution, like lowercase c. That's what a Constitution is a plan, a defining document. So the US Constitution then, combining these two, is the plan that guarantees individual rights, sets up for our representation. Any other brave souls want to give it a shot? Kids are quiet today. Constitution is really the document that organizes our government, creates the 3 branches, creates the rules, protects our individual rights. It is the backbone of the system that we have. If we had a different Constitution, we'd have a different system. It all kind of roots in this. Well, guys, those are the things I wanted to go over today and kind of wrap up C and D moving forward. I love that. A document containing the rights of the people and government. That's awesome. Any questions before we go? All right. Thank you for coming. Have a great Friday. If you need to do your DBA, send me a text or an email or reply to the message I sent you in Canvas and let me know a day and a time that'll work for you, okay? Okay, bye guys. Dustin, it's Sunday, 9/8. Yeah. Just for one more